My name is Nathan, and for a long time, I thought my marriage to Clara was unshakable. When we first met, it was like something out of a movie. Clara was vivacious and full of dreams, and I was drawn to her energy and ambition. We were a team, or at least that's what I believed. Over the years, I worked tirelessly to build a life that would support us both, pouring my heart and soul into our marriage. I took pride in being the provider. Every promotion I earned, every late night spent at the office, every sacrifice I made. I told myself it was all worth it to give Clara the life she deserved. She had dreams of starting her own business, of traveling the world, of living a life of elegance and luxury. I wanted to be the man who made those dreams come true. At first, Clara appreciated my efforts. She would thank me for the small gestures, like surprising her with flowers after a long day, or the big ones, like funding her first trip to Paris. But over time, something began to change. It started with subtle things. Clara became more distant, more critical. She began talking about how her friends' husbands were taking them on lavish vacations or buying them expensive gifts. I brushed it off, telling myself that she was simply expressing her desires, not comparing me to others. Then, the extravagant outings began. Clara started spending more time with her friends, jetting off to tropical destinations or attending high-profile events. I paid for the trips, of course. After all, I wanted her to be happy. But with each trip, I noticed her treating me more like an afterthought. When she came home from these trips, she'd share stories about the fun she had, but she rarely asked about my days or my work. The conversations felt one-sided, as though my role was simply to listen and provide. Still, I told myself it was just a phase. But the cracks in our relationship grew deeper. Clara began to adopt a different tone with me, one that stung more than I wanted to admit. It wasn't just her words. It was the way she said them, with an air of superiority that made me feel small. "You're always so busy," she'd say when I tried to bring up my concerns. "Why don't you just relax for once? Let me handle things." Her dismissive attitude hurt, but I tried to remind myself that marriage was about patience and compromise. I reasoned that I had always supported Clara, and maybe this was just a rough patch. Every couple has them, right? What I didn't realize was that while I was busy building a foundation for our life, Clara had begun to build walls between us. The tipping point came when she planned yet another girls-only getaway. This time, it was a week-long stay at a luxury resort with her friends. She assured me it was something they had all been looking forward to for months, a chance to unwind and bond. "Don't worry, Nathan," she said with a bright smile. "You don't have to lift a finger. I've already booked everything. Just need you to take care of the payment, like usual." Her words stung, but I nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course," I said, handing her my credit card. "Anything for you." As she packed her bags and talked excitedly about the trip, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She seemed more animated when discussing her friends than she ever was when we talked about us. That evening, after Clara had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the flickering light of the television. I couldn't remember the last time we had spent an evening together, just the two of us, without her phone buzzing or her attention drifting elsewhere. I thought about the man I used to be, the man who had fallen in love with Clara all those years ago. I had been so full of hope and ambition, ready to take on the world with her by my side. But now, I felt more like a supporting character in her life than her partner. As I turned off the television and headed to bed, I tried to push the doubts out of my mind. Maybe this trip would help her recharge, I told myself. Maybe things would get better. But deep down, I knew something had changed. And though I didn't want to admit it at the time, I was starting to realize that the foundation of our marriage might not have been as solid as I had once believed. Clara's excitement about her upcoming trip was contagious. At least, that's how it must have seemed to everyone around her. She spent days meticulously planning her outfits, coordinating with her friends, and rattling off the itinerary. I tried to share in her enthusiasm, but a nagging voice in the back of my mind kept reminding me of how distant she'd become. The night before she left, Clara flitted around the house, her suitcase open on the bed as she carefully folded clothes into neat stacks. I leaned against the doorframe, watching her with a mix of admiration and unease. "You've really got this down to a science," I joked, hoping to spark a conversation. She glanced up briefly, flashing a quick smile. You know me. I like to be prepared. Besides, the girls and I have been planning this for months. It's going to be amazing. I'm sure it will be, I said, keeping my tone light. Anything you need from me? Her answer was almost too quick. Just make sure the payment clears. Everything else is taken care of. I nodded, fighting back the urge to say more. There was a time when Clara would have asked me to help her pack, or at least pretended to want my opinion on her plans. But now, I felt more like a financier than a husband. The next morning, she kissed me on the cheek, her suitcase rolling behind her as she headed for the door. I'll call you when we get there, she said over her shoulder. Have fun, I replied, forcing a smile. As the door clicked shut, the house fell silent. It wasn't the first time Clara had gone on a trip without me, but something about this one felt different. I spent the next few days trying to distract myself with work and chores. I told myself it was normal for couples to have separate interests and that Clara deserved to enjoy herself with her friends. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how one-sided our marriage had become. Clara's trips weren't the issue. It was the way she treated me, as if my role was to provide and step aside. I couldn't remember the last time we'd had a meaningful conversation about our future or shared an evening where her attention wasn't glued to her phone. Then came the photos. Clara and her friends were avid social media users, and their vacation was no exception. My phone buzzed with notifications as she tagged me in pictures of pristine beaches, fancy dinners, and luxury hotel suites. The images were beautiful, but they felt like a performance, curated snapshots of a life that had no room for me. She looks happy, I muttered to myself one evening, scrolling through the pictures, but something about the post bothered me. In one photo, Clara and her friends were lounging by the pool, cocktails in hand. The caption read, "Living our best lives. Cheers to freedom." Freedom from what? I wondered, my stomach tightening. It wasn't just the captions that gnawed at me. It was the way Clara looked in the photos, radiant and carefree, like a woman who didn't have a husband waiting for her at home. On the third night of her trip, I decided to call her. It wasn't unusual for Clara to be caught up in the excitement of her vacations, but I hadn't heard much more than a few generic texts since she left. The call went straight to voicemail. "Hey, it's me," I said after the beep. "Just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. Call me when you get a chance." Hours passed without a response. I told myself she was probably busy, but the silence felt heavier than it should have. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Clara's distance wasn't just physical, it was emotional, and it had been for a long time. The next morning, I decided to stop making excuses for her. I logged into our joint account to check the expenses from her trip. What I found made my heart sink. Clara wasn't just indulging in luxury. She was burning through money at an alarming rate. Spa treatments, designer shopping sprees, exclusive dinners. She wasn't holding back. The more I scrolled through the charges, the angrier I became. I had worked hard to provide for us, trusting her to spend wisely, and now I was looking at evidence of her recklessness. By the time Clara finally called me back later that afternoon, I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to let this slide. "Hey, sorry I missed your call," she said breezily. "We've been so busy, it's been non-stop fun." "Sounds like it," I said, my tone colder than I intended. She didn't seem to notice. "Anyway, I just wanted to check in. How's everything at home?" "Fine," I replied shortly. "I hope you're enjoying yourself." "I am," she said, her voice bright. "I'll tell you all about it when I get back." When the call ended, I sat in silence, staring at the phone in my hand. I didn't know exactly what was going on, but I knew one thing. Something had to change. A few days after Clara's cheerful call, I was still trying to push down the growing resentment that had been gnawing at me since her trip began. I told myself to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was just her way of blowing off steam. Then I saw the video. It started innocently enough. I was scrolling through social media, distractedly liking posts and updates from friends and family. Then Clara's account popped up in my feed. She had posted several pictures and videos from her trip, each more extravagant than the last. I hesitated before clicking on one of the videos. It was labeled Girls' Night at the Rooftop Lounge. The video opened with laughter and the clinking of glasses as Clara and her friends lounged on plush sofas, cocktails in hand. They were dressed to the nines, the city lights twinkling behind them. At first, it seemed like just another carefree moment from their vacation. But then the tone shifted. "Nathan didn't even ask about this trip," one of Clara's friends said, her voice dripping with mockery. "Can you believe that? What kind of husband doesn't care?" The group erupted into laughter. Clara was right in the center, her head thrown back, her laughter the loudest of all. "Oh, please," another friend chimed in. "Nathan? He's just a freeloader. Clara's the real breadwinner." My stomach tightened as I watched. The words stung, but what hit me the hardest was Clara's reaction. She didn't defend me. She didn't correct them. Instead, she laughed along, raising her glass in a mock toast. "To freedom," she said, her smile wide and smug. The video ended with more laughter, their faces lit with the glow of the city skyline. I sat there, stunned, my phone still in my hand. I watched the video again, hoping I had misheard, hoping there was some context I had missed. But there wasn't. They had mocked me, mocked the life I worked tirelessly to provide. And Clara, my wife, had joined in. Anger bubbled up inside me, sharp and hot. It wasn't just about the words they had said. It was about what they meant. Clara didn't respect me. She didn't value the sacrifices I had made to give her the life she wanted. To her, I was a joke. I replayed the video one last time, my hands trembling with rage. Every laugh, every smug comment felt like a slap in the face. I had poured everything I had into our marriage, my time, my energy, my finances, and this was how she saw me, as a freeloader? The anger simmered as I began to think about everything I had done for Clara. The long hours at work, the weekends spent fixing things around the house while she was out with her friends, the vacations I had paid for, the endless stream of expenses I had covered without question. And now this. I set the phone down, my mind racing. I could confront her, demand an explanation, but what would that accomplish? She had shown me exactly how she felt about me, and no amount of apologies or excuses could erase what I had seen. Instead, I decided to take a different approach. I opened my laptop and began reviewing our finances. Every trip, every luxury purchase, every indulgence she had made. I documented it all. The deeper I dug, the more I realized just how much I had poured into Clara's lifestyle. It was staggering. By the time I closed the laptop, I had a clear picture of where we stood. Clara might think she was untouchable, but she had underestimated me. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the foundation of our marriage, the love and trust one had once believed was unshakable. But Clara had shown me the truth. The foundation wasn't solid. It was built on my blind devotion and her entitlement. I stared at the ceiling, the anger giving way to a cold, determined clarity. If Clara wanted freedom, she would get it. But it wouldn't come without consequences. I didn't confront Clara right away. The video had lit a fire in me, but I knew better than to act on pure emotion. Confrontation would only lead to arguments, and I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of justifying her behavior. Instead, I channeled my anger into something far more productive, planning. After that night, everything became clear. Clara had shown me who she truly was. She didn't see me as a partner, someone to share a life with. To her, I was a wallet, a means to an end. The foundation of our marriage wasn't built on love or respect. It was built on convenience. The next morning, I went about my routine as if nothing had changed. I made coffee, read the news, and even sent Clara a casual text asking how her trip was going. Her response came quickly, filled with exclamation points and emojis about how amazing the rooftop bar was and how much fun she was having with her friends. I set my phone down, shaking my head. She didn't even realize the storm brewing beneath the surface. I began reviewing our finances more thoroughly, going back years to track every expense I had covered for Clara. Luxury vacations, designer clothes, spa treatments, expensive dinners. The list was endless. As I compiled the numbers, I couldn't help but feel a bitter mix of anger and regret. How had I let it get to this point? How had I allowed myself to be taken advantage of so thoroughly? But this wasn't just about money. It was about respect, or the lack of it. Clara's betrayal wasn't just financial. It was personal. She had turned me into a punchline, a joke for her and her friends to laugh at over cocktails. I called my lawyer, Daniel, later that afternoon. Daniel was a no-nonsense kind of guy, someone I trusted to handle this situation with precision and discretion. "Divorce papers?" he asked after I explained the situation. "Yes," I replied firmly. "I want them ready as soon as possible." He paused for a moment. "Are you sure about this, Nathan? Divorce is a big step." "She made her decision when she turned our marriage into a joke," I said. "Now, I'm making mine." Daniel agreed to get started immediately. We discussed the assets, our house, the joint accounts, and everything else that would need to be addressed. I made it clear that I wasn't interested in dragging this out or playing games. I just wanted to sever ties and move on. As the days passed, I continued to play the role of the oblivious husband. Clara called occasionally, filling me in on her adventures and thanking me for letting her take this time for herself. "Of course," I said, keeping my tone light. "You deserve it." Every word felt like a lie, but I kept up the charade. The longer Clara believed she had the upper hand, the easier it would be to catch her off guard. When I wasn't working or compiling financial records, I spent time reflecting on our relationship. Looking back, I realized how many red flags I had ignored over the years. Clara's growing obsession with materialism, her increasing distance, her constant comparisons to her friends' husbands. It had all been there, but I had chosen to look the other way. Not anymore. I reached out to a close friend, Eric, who had always been a voice of reason in my life. He listened patiently as I explained everything: the video, the finances, the decision to file for divorce. "Nathan, I'm sorry," he said after a long pause. "I knew things between you and Clara weren't perfect, but I didn't realize it was this bad." "I didn't either," I admitted. "Not until I saw that video." "You're doing the right thing," Eric said firmly. "She doesn't deserve you. And honestly, you'll be better off without her." His words were reassuring, but they didn't dull the sting of betrayal. Still, they gave me the resolve to move forward. The day the divorce papers were ready, I felt a strange sense of calm. It was as if a weight I had been carrying for years had finally been lifted. I instructed Daniel to deliver the papers directly to Clara at her hotel, along with a note: "You can pick up the rest of your things once the divorce is finalized." When I hit send on the email confirming the delivery instructions, I leaned back in my chair and took a deep breath. Clara thought she had everything under control, but she was about to learn just how wrong she was. For years, I had been the provider, the one who held everything together. Now, I was reclaiming that control, not for her, but for myself. And as I sat there, the calm before the storm settled around me. The moment I hit send on the email to Daniel, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in years. The divorce papers were no longer an abstract idea. They were a reality, a decisive action that put me back in control of my life. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one. Clara had made her choices, and I wasn't going to let her turn me into a punchline any longer. The papers were delivered to Clara at her hotel the next day. Daniel had arranged for them to be handed to her personally, ensuring there was no way she could miss them. Along with the papers was the note I had carefully composed: "You can pick up the rest of your things once the divorce is finalized." The thought of Clara's reaction made me uneasy, but it also brought a sense of grim satisfaction. She had laughed at my expense, mocked the life I had worked so hard to provide, and now she would have to face the consequences. Later that day, my phone began buzzing. Clara's name appeared on the screen over and over again. I ignored every call, letting them go to voicemail. The first few messages were confused, almost dismissive. "Nathan, what is this? Divorce papers? Is this some kind of joke? Call me back so we can clear this up." But as the hours passed, her tone shifted. "Nathan, you're being ridiculous. This is petty, even for you. Do you seriously think this is how you handle things? Call me back now." By the evening, the messages became desperate. "Nathan, please, we need to talk. I don't understand why you're doing this. Can we just talk this through? Please." I listened to each voicemail, my emotions a mix of anger and resolve. Clara's attempts to manipulate me with her shifting tone, confusion, condescension, desperation, were nothing new. But this time, they didn't affect me the way they used to. I turned off my phone and poured myself a drink, the weight of the day settling over me. For years, I had been Clara's safety net, the one who cleaned up her messes and ensured she always had what she wanted. But now, the safety net was gone. The next morning, Daniel called to check in. "The papers were delivered," he said. "My courier confirmed she accepted them personally." "Good," I replied, taking a sip of coffee. "She'll likely contest the divorce," he warned. "Given how dependent she's been on your finances, she'll want to negotiate for as much as she can get." "I'm prepared for that," I said. "She can contest all she wants, but I'm not backing down." Daniel's voice softened. "I know this isn't easy, Nathan, but you're handling it the right way." His reassurance was comforting, though I knew the road ahead wouldn't be smooth. Clara wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. Later that day, I heard from Eric, who had been keeping tabs on the situation through mutual friends. "Word's already spreading," he said. "Clara's at the hotel making a scene. Apparently, she's blaming everyone but herself for the divorce." I chuckled, shaking my head. "Sounds about right." "She even turned on her friends," Eric continued. "Called them out for encouraging her to act like this. From what I hear, it's a mess over there." The image of Clara lashing out at her friends didn't bring me any satisfaction, but it did confirm one thing. She wasn't prepared for the consequences of her actions. As the day turned to evening, my thoughts drifted to the future. The decision to file for divorce hadn't been easy, but it was the first step toward reclaiming my life. For too long, I had let Clara's needs overshadow my own. Now, I was finally putting myself first. Sitting in the quiet of my home, I felt a strange sense of peace. The papers had been served, the wheels were in motion, and there was no turning back. This wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about starting over, building a life where I was valued and respected. And as I sat there, sipping my drink and listening to the faint hum of the evening, I knew one thing for certain. I was ready for whatever came next. The calls began again early the next morning, the first one coming through just as I poured my coffee. Clara's name lit up the screen, but I let it ring, choosing silence over the inevitable storm of words she would unleash. Her voicemails piled up, each one more frantic than the last. "Nathan, you can't be serious about this." Her voice rang through the first message, indignation dripping from every word. "Divorce papers? Delivered to my hotel? You've completely lost it." By the fourth or fifth message, her tone had shifted from anger to desperation. "Nathan, please, let's talk. This doesn't have to be the end. We can work through this. It was just a stupid joke. Don't throw everything away over nothing." The irony of her words didn't escape me. She wanted me to believe that her public humiliation of me, her blatant disregard for our marriage, and her reckless spending were all nothing. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Clara's actions had already spoken louder than anything she could say now. By mid-afternoon, the calls slowed, but the text messages began. She flooded my phone with a barrage of pleas, accusations, and excuses, as if throwing every possible tactic at me might change my mind. "Nathan, we've been together for years. Don't let one misunderstanding ruin everything. You know I've always loved you. This is just a mistake. Are you really going to give up on us? On our life together? After everything we've been through?" The messages were a roller coaster of emotions, from guilt trips to flattery to outright demands. But I knew Clara too well. This wasn't love. It was panic. She had built her life around the comforts I provided, and now that those comforts were slipping away, she didn't know how to cope. Later that evening, Eric called with another update. "Clara's in meltdown mode," he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Word's gotten out about the divorce papers, and she's not handling it well. Apparently, she's blaming everyone but herself." I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "That sounds about right. She's been going off on her friends," Eric continued, accusing them of ruining her marriage and egging her on. "They're starting to turn on her, too. Nobody wants to be dragged into the drama." The image of Clara, once so poised and confident, now unraveling in front of the very people she had chosen over me, was almost surreal. "She's calling you every name in the book," Eric added with a laugh. "But honestly, it sounds like she's just scrambling to save face." "Let her," I said simply. "I'm done worrying about what Clara thinks or does." That night, Clara finally broke her silence in a different way. She sent a long email, pouring out what she must have thought were heartfelt apologies and justifications. "Nathan, I know I hurt you, but I never meant for it to go this far. The video wasn't serious. It was just a joke, something stupid between friends. I shouldn't have laughed, and I shouldn't have let them say those things about you. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. Please, let's talk." I read the email twice, not because I was considering her words, but because I wanted to make sure I wasn't missing the point. She wasn't apologizing for what she had done. She was apologizing for getting caught. I closed the email without replying. The next morning, Daniel called to let me know Clara had officially acknowledged the divorce papers. "She hasn't filed a response yet, but that's normal," he said. "Expect her to drag this out as long as she can." "She can try," I replied, "but I'm not backing down." Daniel chuckled. "Good. That's the mindset you need." Over the next few days, Clara's attempts to contact me dwindled. The voicemails stopped, the texts became sporadic, and the email remained unanswered. I could only imagine the chaos she was dealing with as her carefully constructed world began to crumble. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity. Clara had treated our marriage like a game, but I had decided to play by my own rules. As I sat in the quiet of my home that evening, sipping a glass of wine and reflecting on the whirlwind of events, I felt a sense of peace. Clara's reaction had been exactly what I expected, an attempt to regain control, but I wasn't hers to control anymore. This was the first time in years that I felt truly free. Word travels fast, especially in the circles Clara and her friends frequented. The delivery of the divorce papers at her five-star hotel caused ripples that quickly turned into waves. While I was at home, calmly going about my business, Clara was unraveling in the middle of her girls-only getaway. I didn't need to be there to imagine how it went. The message was clear, and Clara had no choice but to confront it in front of the very friends she had been laughing with just days before. Eric, my trusted source of updates, called me that evening. "Nathan, you're not going to believe this," he said, barely able to contain his laughter. Clara lost it at the hotel when the papers arrived. She apparently tore into her friends right there in the lounge, accusing them of ruining her marriage. I leaned back in my chair, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Let me guess, they didn't take it well?" "Not at all," Eric confirmed. "From what I hear, one of her friends, Monica, I think, shot back that it wasn't their fault she treated you the way she did. It turned into a full-blown argument. People were staring. The mental image was almost too perfect. Clara, the epitome of grace and composure in public, completely losing control in front of an audience. It wasn't something I took joy in, but it felt like a strange kind of justice." Eric continued, his voice full of amusement. "Apparently, the rest of her friends tried to distance themselves from the whole thing. Nobody wanted to take responsibility, and now they're all pointing fingers at each other." Clara stormed out after that. "Where did she go?" I asked, though I already had an idea. "Probably back to her room to call you," Eric said. "But I'm guessing she didn't get through." "She didn't," I replied. "And she won't." Over the next few days, I learned more about what happened at the hotel through bits and pieces from mutual acquaintances. Clara's meltdown had turned into the talk of the town. The friends she once relied on for validation were now avoiding her, unwilling to be caught in the fallout of her crumbling image. The drama escalated when the hotel management became involved. Clara's behavior, her yelling, the public accusations, and her refusal to calm down, had drawn complaints from other guests. By the time she checked out, she was no longer the center of admiration but a source of gossip and whispers. She returned home earlier than planned, her vacation cut short by the reality she had tried so hard to avoid. When Clara walked through the door of the house we had once shared, she was greeted not by the life of comfort and luxury she had grown accustomed to, but by a stark new reality. Her belongings were neatly packed in boxes, stacked near the entryway like a visual representation of her choices. I wasn't there to see her reaction. I had made sure of that. Instead, I left a note taped to the front door. Your things are ready for pickup. This house is no longer your home. Eric called me later that evening to share the aftermath. She's blaming you for everything, of course, he said. But from what I hear, she's got no one left to back her up. Even her closest friends are keeping their distance. That's not my problem anymore, I said simply. Eric chuckled. I have to hand it to you, Nathan. You handled this perfectly. Clara thought she could walk all over you, but you flipped the script. It wasn't about revenge, I replied, though part of me did enjoy the poetic justice. It was about taking back control of my life. That night, I sat in the quiet of my newly reclaimed home, reflecting on everything that had led to this moment. Clara had built her world on shallow relationships and a false sense of superiority. Now, that world was falling apart, leaving her with nothing but the consequences of her actions. As for me, I felt a deep sense of closure. The house, once a symbol of my blind devotion, was now a testament to my strength and resolve. Clara could blame me, her friends, or anyone else she wanted, but the truth was clear. She had brought this on herself. Clara returned home 2 days after her early checkout from the hotel. The confident woman who had once strutted through the door, full of demands and entitlement, was nowhere to be seen. Instead, she looked defeated, her usual polished appearance disheveled, her steps hesitant as she approached the house. She stood on the porch for a moment, staring at the note I had taped to the door. Her gaze shifted to the neatly packed boxes stacked beside it, everything she owned condensed into a few cardboard containers. For several minutes, she didn't move. She just stood there, clutching her phone, as if willing the situation to change. But it didn't. Eventually, Clara let herself in with the key I hadn't yet changed. I was waiting for her in the living room, sitting calmly in the armchair with a cup of coffee. Nathan, she said, her voice trembling as she stepped inside. What's going on? Why are my things outside? I set my cup down and looked at her, keeping my expression neutral. They're outside because this is no longer your home, Clara. She flinched as if I'd struck her. You can't mean that. This is our house. No, I replied firmly. This is my house. You gave up your claim to it the moment you turned our marriage into a joke. Her face crumpled, and she dropped her bag onto the floor. Nathan, please. Let's talk about this. The video, it wasn't serious. It was just a joke. You know how Monica and the others are. They don't think before they speak. And you? I asked, my voice cutting through her excuses. Did you think before you laughed along with them? Did you think before you let them mock me in our marriage? Or before you spent years treating me like a wallet instead of a husband? Tears filled her eyes, and she shook her head. Nathan, it wasn't like that. I swear. I love you. I've always loved you. I leaned forward, my hands clasped together as I looked her in the eye. Love doesn't look like this, Clara. Love doesn't humiliate or take advantage. Love doesn't turn a marriage into a punchline for a group of shallow friends. She sank onto the couch, her hands trembling as she tried to explain. It was stupid. I know that now. I got caught up in their world, in their way of thinking. I didn't mean for it to go this far. You have to believe me. I don't have to believe anything, I said calmly. Your actions told me everything I needed to know. I believed in us, Clara. I believed in our marriage, in the life we were building together. But you showed me exactly what you thought of me, and I can't unsee that. The weight of my words seemed to hit her all at once. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Nathan, she whispered, her voice muffled, please don't do this. I can change. I'll be better. Just give me a chance to make this right. I stood, my voice steady as I delivered the words I had rehearsed in my mind countless times. This isn't about punishment, Clara. It's about moving on. For both of us. You made your choices, and now I'm making mine. The divorce is happening. The papers have already been filed. There's nothing left to discuss. She looked up at me, desperation etched across her face. Nathan, please. I raised a hand, cutting her off. You can pick up your things whenever you're ready. Until the divorce is finalized, I suggest we keep communication to a minimum. Clara stared at me for a long moment, her expression a mix of disbelief and heartbreak. Finally, she rose from the couch, her movements slow and deliberate. "I didn't think you had it in you," she said softly, her voice laced with bitterness. I met her gaze, unflinching. "Neither did I. But you taught me to stop underestimating myself." She grabbed her bag and walked to the door, pausing for a moment as if expecting me to call her back. When I didn't, she opened the door and stepped outside, the sound of the door clicking shut behind her echoing in the quiet house. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. For the first time in years, it felt like I was standing on solid ground, no longer weighed down by Clara's manipulations or the expectations I had placed on myself to keep our marriage alive. That night, as I sat in the living room with a glass of whiskey, I reflected on the moment Clara had walked out the door. It wasn't triumph I felt, it was relief. Relief that I had taken back control. Relief that I was no longer tied to a relationship that had drained me. Relief that, finally, I was free. The house felt different after Clara left, quieter but not empty. For the first time in years, I felt the absence of tension, of walking on eggshells, of trying to meet impossible expectations. The silence wasn't lonely, it was liberating. With the divorce underway, I focused on rebuilding my life. I began with the house. Clara's influence was everywhere, from the meticulously curated decor to the items she had insisted we buy but barely used. Now, it was time to reclaim the space and make it mine again. I spent the weekend clearing out anything that reminded me of her. Fancy throw pillows, decorative vases, and furniture pieces chosen more for their Instagram appeal than practicality. I replaced them with things that felt personal and meaningful. A comfortable couch I could sink into after a long day, family photos that had been tucked away in favor of Clara's designer prints, and a set of bookshelves filled with novels I had neglected over the years. Friends and colleagues began reaching out as word of the divorce spread. Some offered support, while others expressed admiration for how I had handled the situation. "Honestly, Nathan," Eric said over dinner one evening, "I didn't think you'd go through with it. But watching you take charge has been incredible. You look lighter." "I feel lighter," I admitted. For so long, I let Clara's expectations dictate my life. Now, it's like I'm finally living for myself. Eric nodded, raising his glass. "To freedom." "To freedom," I echoed, clinking my glass against his. Work became a source of fulfillment again, not just a means to fund someone else's lifestyle. I threw myself into my projects, rediscovering the passion I had once had for what I did. My productivity soared, and with it, my confidence. But the biggest shift came in the little things. Morning coffee on the porch, long walks in the park, evenings spent reading instead of arguing. I hadn't realized how much of myself I had sacrificed to keep Clara happy. Now, I was rediscovering the man I used to be, the man I wanted to be. One evening, I decided to return to an old hobby that had fallen by the wayside: cooking. Clara had always insisted on takeout or expensive restaurant dinners, dismissing my love for experimenting in the kitchen. Now, with no one to criticize my efforts, I spent an entire evening crafting a meal from scratch. It wasn't perfect, the sauce was a little too thick, and the presentation wouldn't win any awards. But it was mine. Sitting at the dining table with a plate of food I had made with my own hands, I felt a sense of accomplishment that had been missing for years. As the weeks passed, I found myself reconnecting with people and experiences I had neglected during my marriage. Friends invited me out for drinks or hikes, colleagues introduced me to their social circles, and I even attended a few community events I would have avoided in the past. It was at one of these events, a local art exhibit, that I met someone who would change everything. Her name was Grace, and she had an easy warmth about her that immediately put me at ease. We struck up a conversation about one of the paintings, and before I knew it, we were talking about everything from travel to books to life's unexpected twists. Grace wasn't flashy or demanding. She was genuine, kind, and refreshingly down to earth. For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark, not the kind of fleeting attraction that fades, but something deeper, something real. As we exchanged numbers at the end of the evening, I couldn't help but smile. Meeting Grace wasn't something I had planned or expected, but it felt like the universe's way of reminding me that life goes on, and sometimes it even gets better. Meanwhile, Clara's world continued to unravel. Mutual friends informed me that her attempts to maintain her lavish lifestyle had failed spectacularly. Without my financial support, the reality of her situation had set in. She had downsized to a modest apartment and taken a retail job to make ends meet. "She's not handling it well," Eric said during one of our conversations. "Keeps blaming everyone but herself. It's like she can't accept that this is the result of her own choices." I listened without judgment, but Clara's struggles no longer felt like my burden. She had made her decisions, and I had made mine. One evening, as I sat on the porch of my home with a glass of wine, I reflected on how far I had come. The pain of Clara's betrayal had once consumed me, but now it felt like a distant memory. I had moved on, not just from her, but from the version of myself that allowed her to diminish my worth. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. Months had passed since I served Clara the divorce papers, and my life was unrecognizable in the best possible way. The chaos of that chapter had finally faded into the background, leaving space for something I hadn't felt in years: peace. The house, now fully my own, had become a sanctuary. It no longer reminded me of Clara's demands or the weight of trying to keep her happy. Instead, it reflected who I was, a place of comfort, warmth, and simplicity. Friends who visited often commented on how much more inviting it felt, and I took pride in knowing that I had created a home, not just a house. Clara, on the other hand, had disappeared from my life almost entirely. The divorce had been finalized with minimal drama, though I knew she had fought bitterly behind the scenes to salvage whatever she could. Mutual friends told me she was struggling to maintain her old lifestyle, having burned bridges with her social circle and finding herself without the support she once took for granted. "She's still blaming everyone but herself," Eric told me during a phone call. "Her friends are done with her, and she's hopping between jobs trying to stay afloat." I didn't feel anger or satisfaction at the news. It was simply a reminder of the choices Clara had made and the consequences she had to face. Meanwhile, I was thriving. My work had reached new heights, and for the first time in years, I was being recognized for my efforts. Promotions, accolades, and new opportunities came my way, but more importantly, I felt proud of the man I was becoming. But it wasn't just work that had changed. Grace, the woman I met at the art exhibit, had become an unexpected and wonderful part of my life. What started as casual conversations over coffee turned into something deeper. Grace was everything Clara wasn't: genuine, kind, and supportive in ways I hadn't realized I needed. One evening, as we walked along a quiet trail, she turned to me with a smile. "You seem lighter these days," she said, "like you've let go of something heavy." I looked at her, realizing how right she was. "I have," I said. "For years, I let myself get lost in a marriage that drained me. But now I feel like I'm finally living again." Her smile widened, and she slipped her hand into mine. "You deserve that." Grace didn't try to fill the void Clara had left. She wasn't a replacement or a distraction. She was her own person, and she brought out the best in me without trying to change who I was. One evening, as we sat on my porch watching the sunset, I realized just how far I'd come. The man who had once doubted himself, who had let someone else dictate his worth, was gone. In his place was someone stronger, wiser, and more determined to live life on his own terms. "I'm proud of you," Grace said softly, resting her head on my shoulder. "For what?" I asked, glancing at her. "For everything," she said. "For rebuilding your life. For not letting the past define you. For being you." Her words settled over me like a warm blanket, and in that moment, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for her, for the journey I had been on, and for the future that lay ahead. Months later, I heard through the grapevine that Clara was still trying to claw her way back to the life she once had. Her lifestyle, once built on my hard work, had crumbled, and without it, she was left trying to piece together a new reality. It was a cautionary tale, one I didn't need to hear to appreciate the lessons I had learned. Standing on the balcony of my home one evening, a glass of wine in hand, I watched the city lights twinkle in the distance. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Every decision, every step forward, was a reflection of the man I had become. As Grace joined me, her laughter filling the evening air, I realized something profound. The divorce wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of something far better, a life where I was valued, respected, and finally, truly happy. And for that, I raised my glass, not to revenge, not to regret, but to resilience and new beginnings.